Fewer reporters means issues we need to know about are just not getting covered. It's very obvious, but it's real. Bad drinking water, inadequate health care, injustice in the courts, corruption at City Hall, failing schools, solutions that work don't get paid attention to. And I haven't mentioned any big partisan national issue that can divide us. I love being here on the campus of Boston College. I have family here, some of whom are alums, including my sister Ellen. My mother is here. And Virginia Morgan Sennett grew up on Garrison Street, just on the other side of the reservoir. St. Ignatius was the parish where she was baptized, confirmed, married, and where my father's funeral mass was delivered. All of this year, I've been able to work with my mom to help her write her memoir about all those years. It's been such a pleasure to go through this research and to think about how steeped our family is in this neighborhood, and to trace that history from 1930 on, and to be aware of just how large this institution in St. Ignatius looms in our shared history. It's an honor and truly humbling to be invited to be part of the Lowell Humanities Series. This series has such a rich history and a continuum of public dialogue by some of the greatest truth tellers we have in our country. So many disciplines across 60 years. Robert Frost, Margaret Mead, Maya Angelou, Seamus Haney, Michael Sandel, and so many others. They all represent what we call ground truth. The simple idea that the best way to ascertain truth, whether you're a poet or an anthropologist or a scientist or an ethicist or a journalist, is to be there on the ground doing your work. It's a simple concept, but it's a philosophy that lies at the heart of all good journalism, and it's what we believe in at the Ground Truth Project. We support a new generation of journalists to tell the most important stories of our time, and we're trying to share with them this mission and a passion for ground truth. It's a concept that's fading. We see less and less ground truth in so many disciplines, and I really hope we can get into the discussion for many of you who come from different disciplines to share whether or not there's enough ground truth in your own discipline. So I want to really start with a definition of ground truth. Ground truth is a technical term. How many of you have heard of this term before? It's a technical term that's very precise. My wife and my brother don't count. How many of you really have heard this term? I love this term because of its precision. Ground truth is a technical term coined by NASA. When you look it up on the NASA website, it talks about a calibration process where a person on the ground makes a measurement of the same thing the satellite is trying to measure at the same time. This calibration process takes place in what's known as ground truthing. And the satellite is measured against the ground truth. And I never think of NASA as poetic, but NASA claims the human reading is the one to trust. They say if there is a conflict between the technology and the human reading on the ground, trust the human reading, trust the ground truth. That's, for us, the metaphor for what we do. We live in a world of technology. We live in a world where we're bombarded by information. But we need to calibrate that against the truth that we as journalists see on the ground. That's our job. That's what we need to do. And that's why we are called the Ground Truth Project. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Google Earth. You've used it before. You've come in. Next time you're doing that, think about that. Just think about the ground truthing that's involved in that process. You're taking an array of pixels in the sky that are received by a satellite, and just think about how it is going to translate down into the image of your rooftop or your neighborhood, your community. That process can't happen without ground truthing, and I really hope it's a phrase that we can bring forward into our times where we need to be thinking about this. We need to trust the human readings. Aquinas. How many of you are students here studying Aquinas? Okay, I'm not going to talk about Aquinas. It's okay. Just kidding. No, but I love this quote from Aquinas. A judgment is said to be true when it conforms to the external reality. It sounds like it comes right out of the NASA definition of ground truth to me. And I think we need to think about the great thinkers and the great theologians and the great pursuits of truth. So, what is truth? It's a question that's as ancient as the Greek philosopher Plato, and it's a debate as modern and Orwellian as the latest news cycle on MSNBC or Fox. Rudy Giuliani, in defending President Trump just this month, stated, "Truth isn't truth." And a meme is born. It's a powerful question of faith. One of the most eternally significant questions in the Bible was posed by an unbeliever, Pilate, the man who handed Jesus over to be crucified. Jesus had revealed, "I've come into the world to testify to the truth." And Pilate turns to Jesus in the New Testament in his final hour and asks, "What's truth?" It's a rhetorical question and a cynical response. Pilate doesn't even wait for the answer. Instead, he turns to the crowd and he gives them another chance to save Jesus. And they shout, "Crucify him." 2,000 years later, the whole world breathes Pilate's cynicism. This questioning of truth permeates our civil discourse. We can no longer even agree on shared facts. We have a president who, when confronted with truths he finds unhelpful, deflates them as fake news. We have people who are literally calibrating and counting the lies that the President of the United States is putting forward. It's at 5,000 and counting. Discernible untruths, also known as lies. The New York Times has taken to calling it a lie. They thought long and hard about the words. They thought long and hard about, is that partisan? Is that unfair? Is that something that we shouldn't have a judgment value around? I hope we can agree that when you defy discernible facts with something that is false, that's called a lie. And when you do it with an intention to deceive or confuse or conflate or distract, we need to think about that. I really want to be clear here. I do not say this as a partisan attack. I am old school with journalism. I think we have a lot to answer for in journalism. We have to get back to owning that nonpartisan approach. We have to work harder. So how do we get here? How do we get to the point where we can have such an erosion of truth? The 1960s created a belief that we can claim our own truth. The truth we claim is as valid as any other. Relativism was sort of the buzzword of campuses in the 1960s. In the 1990s, we created the internet, and suddenly all manner of truth was questioned through anonymous comments, and we all get blindsided by social media. It's no wonder it's so hard to discern, like, what is the truth? How do we get at that? We live in a time when it feels as if doubt has become weaponized. The truth itself is now under attack. So what does this mean for our craft of journalism? It means right now and forevermore, we need to work a lot harder to be sure we do our job. We have to do better. Journalism has failed us by failing to step clear of partisan politics and opinions and to do the work of hearing out all sides and getting to that human reading. We have to be better, but that doesn't mean we have to be indifferent. That does not mean we can't connect the dots with the facts we work hard to ascertain. It doesn't mean we can't call out leaders who defy the facts and state things that are not true. And it definitely doesn't mean we give up. I think it means we have to recognize that the crisis of journalism has become a crisis for our democracy. And we really need to think about that. I'm going to talk about this crisis in journalism and the many forces that are conspiring to put pressure on journalism, the physical attacks that are coming forward and that are putting so much pressure on journalists these days, And I'm going to do that by just stopping for a moment and stepping back and telling you my own ground truth, my own story, my own journey from some of those faces look awfully young in some of those press passes. And then you see the grizzled guy about 10 years ago in Afghanistan. And then standing before you is all the damage wrought by all that reporting. I was laughing at the photograph on the way in. It's a wonderful testament to the fact that my family has huge eyebrows. And we have an eyebrow contest every summer. And I've won only once, so you can imagine how everyone else looks. My own journey through journalism really mirrors some of the broad trends that have been going on and that I want to share with you today. But I started off in the 1980s at the height of the profession in a lot of ways. Certainly in terms of revenue, it was the height of the profession. In terms of circulation with newspapers, it was the height of the profession. I was inspired, like a lot of people of my generation, by Woodward and Bernstein, by Watergate, by the story. You've seen the movie, you've seen the paper. That was what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to be. I was inspired by a local Boston newsman named Danny Schechter, your news dissector on WBCN. And I was inspired by a lot of people, and particularly by the Boston Globe, a place I really wanted to work because I thought it fought hard to tell hard truths. I landed my first job in public radio out in Western Massachusetts at WFCR. First story I ever covered was my own graduation. Dr. J got an honorary doctorate. I went to Columbia School of Journalism for a master's degree, and I wanted to shift from radio to print. I landed a job out of Columbia in a small newspaper called the Bergen Record, just over the George Washington Bridge in New Jersey. I covered planning board meetings and local communities along the Hudson River. It was like covering The Sopranos before it was actually made for TV. I was learning that truth is hard work. You go cover a planning board meeting and you hear an elderly woman talk about a complaint about noise on her street. And I stopped and I asked her, what's going on? Well, these huge trucks are coming down the street at all hours of the early morning, like pre-dawn. And they're just rumbling down the street. And I said, well, where do they go? And she said, I don't know. So I went and looked. And they were huge trucks bringing construction debris from New York City to dump it in the Meadowlands. That's the story. Truth is hard work. Truth is getting up early, following the trucks, then following them back to the Garofalo brothers to find out this is a mobbed up trucking company, and then realizing, well, wait a minute, how do they get them through the Lincoln Tunnel? Someone's got to be paid off here. That's what it is to be a reporter. That's what it is to do this work. That's ground truth, and the truth is hard work. I want to tell you really quickly about tabloid days, because there was a time in New York City where I shifted from the Bergen Record across that glorious Hudson River to the shining metropolis of New York City to work at the New York Daily News, and it was like living in film noir. It was black and white. You could smoke in the newsroom. It was just another time. It was old school characters like Jimmy Breslin, Pete Hamill. How many of you know Jimmy Breslin by name? I just hear Pete Hamill. These were heroes of New York City that some people in Boston knew about, others didn't. Great journalists. When I got to the Daily News, I thought, wow, here I am, I'm covering all these stories. John Gotti is a big story I covered. I covered a lot of racial tensions in New York City at the time. This was a time when Bensonhurst blew up in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bensonhurst, and then Crown Heights blew up. And I think fondly of those days, I think fondly of the characters, and I also recognize that we weren't that good at our jobs. We were not really trying hard enough to understand race in New York City at a time when we should have been trying harder. We blew it on a bunch of stories. One story I worked on called the Central Park Jogger case was a story that I would personally take responsibility for not doing a good enough job on. I can talk about that if we get more time in the end, but I just don't want to over-glorify days that actually we should look back on and we know we should have been better. But it was genuinely a lot of fun. We drank a lot. We went to bars. I literally worked in a building where Superman was filmed, where Clark Kent changed in the phone booth. That was literally the building I worked in. The Daily Planet was the New York Daily News. And amid all this kind of wonderful chaos of that time, a phone call came into the newsroom and a great editor said, send this call over to Senate. And the call was from a young man, a boy, who wanted to let the newspaper know that Father Bruce Ritter, a hero of New York City, someone who was literally in the process of canonization for sainthood, who had been made ABC News Person of the Year, who was in George H.W. Bush's speech, 1,000 Points of Light. The first time that phrase was uttered at the State of the Union speech, they showed Father Bruce Ritter. And this young person was coming to us with a story that he's not America's answer to Mother Teresa, he's a predator. And that he was sexually abusing young boys who he would find in Port Authority, just so hard to believe. You have to remember, this is 1989. No one was reporting that. There was no movie spotlight. There was just this shock. And I remember the editors were like sort of so randy and wild, they thought it was almost funny to send this story over to me because they knew I come from a family that, is pretty traditional in its faith. And I like my faith. And I just, I was like shocked that this could happen. And as I delved into that story, I realized that's ground truth too. Sometimes it takes you on a very dark journey. And the truth is really hard work. That was a hard story for me to do. I'm proud now, in retrospect, all these years later. What we unleashed was the first priest sex abuse story in America, and it opened up darkness that had to be exposed. We had to bring light into our church. It challenged my faith, but I never lost my faith. I wrote a book about it, and it's called Broken Covenant. And I always think of that title, Broken Covenant. It still stands for me as like a title that can go through the years, because it is what happened. The failures of the leadership of our church broke the covenant with us. And that doesn't mean we should lose our faith. We can come back to that if we want to. But I'm telling you, it's emotional to be a reporter on a story like that. And again, the truth is hard work. When I got rid of that story, and I say got rid of it because it was really hard to report on, I just wanted to get back to street reporting. I wanted to get back to like being a cop reporter and doing that reporting again. I was down in Lower Manhattan. There was a huge bang. And I didn't know what it was, and you never know in New York City. It could be someone just literally dropping like one of those dumpsters, or you don't know. So you just kind of ignore it until I heard lots of sirens, and then I excused myself from the person I was talking to, started to walk down the street toward the sound of the sirens. It's in the World Trade Center parking garage. It's 1993. And I started seeing people running from the parking garage. They got soot on their face. They're really scared. They don't know what's happened. And I realized, I got to get there. And that, if you were going to crystallize what is the definition of a journalist, it's the person who hears a bang, then hears sirens, then walks in the direction everyone else is running from to find out what's going on. That's what we do. I might add a little asterisk, which is, and when you get there, you see a lot of friends who are trying to do the same thing. When I got there, I realized no one knew what had happened. It's 1993. I can't stress that enough. No one thought it was terrorism. The first reports were, it's a generator explosion. The next one was, it must be a subway crash. No one said bomb. I did a thing you do in journalism, which is I carry a yellow legal pad and I have a really good confident nod, like I know where I am and I know I should be here. And I walked right past the police lines to get down, to get a look at what was going on inside that World Trade Center parking garage, because I really wanted to know. And when I saw them string emergency lighting and I saw a 5-story deep crater with cars tumbled down in it, I realized this is a bomb. It was so long ago, for those of you who are students, that we didn't have cell phones. And I went to what was called a payphone. It was a little box, and you dropped a quarter in it at this point. It used to be drop a dime, which, so you know, is where the phrase drop a dime comes from. Dropped a quarter, called the desk. My editor said, "What's going on?" I said, "It's a bomb." And they said, "Yeah, no, that's not what TV is reporting. We even got like a live press conference. They're saying it's a generator explosion." I'm like, "It's a bomb." And they said, "Well, how do you know that? How do you know that? What's the truth? Ground truth." I said, "It's a 5-story deep crater. I saw them in Medellin, Colombia. I've seen them in Belfast. You guys have sent me on these stories. I know what a bombing looks like. It's a bombing." "Yeah, well, you got to get someone saying that." And just as I was about to hang up, the bomb squad pulled up. And I said, hey, Billy, it's Bill Boyle. I go, "Billy, is this enough proof?" the bomb squad just pulled up. And he went, oh my God, all right, just do all you can. We're going to change the front page. Keep going. That's ground truth. Now that story led me to a life of trying to cover that. Literally, it became sort of a journey to the Middle East. I began to really look at how that could happen, and it became a story that I do all the time. I leave tomorrow to go back to the Middle East. It's a story I've never given up. It's a story I've just always reported. So this picture here is from Afghanistan. Now, when I reported that story out in 1993, it led to the Boston Globe saying, hey, you should come work in Boston, and we want you to be the Middle East bureau chief someday. We want you to start covering the city and doing sort of special reports, but don't think you're going to get it right away, but we might make you Middle East bureau chief as a foreign correspondent. That was in the day when the Globe had foreign bureaus all over the world, if you can imagine that time again. And I really wanted to do that work. I knew I had something to say, so I was lucky. I got the job at the Globe. I came, I worked really hard. I broke a bunch of stories here in Boston. And they finally said, yep, we're going to make you Middle East bureau chief. So I go over to do the Middle East bureau chief with my wife, Julie. We took our son, Will, who was about a month old. He's now 6'5" and a senior at UMass Amherst. And we just arrived. And for the next 5 years, I just reported the story of the Middle East and this rising crescendo from the 1993 bombing, in which it was becoming really apparent that this thing that I wrote about in 1993 had grown into what we now call Al-Qaeda. And it had become a real threat to our country. There was also the local story where we were based in Jerusalem, and it was the Intifada. The bus bombings were getting closer and closer. We were having more and more kids. We had, Riley was born in Jerusalem, and then Gabriel was born in Bethlehem, so we have one born in Jerusalem with an Israeli birth certificate, and then we have one born in Bethlehem, the West Bank, with a Palestinian birth certificate. Try going through customs with those guys. Then the bus bombings got too close, and one went very close to our son's school. And I called the Globe and I said, look, this is getting to be pretty close. I can always handle the risk myself, but when I put my family in harm's way, I worry. And they said, yeah, no worries. We actually have an opening at the London bureau. And I was like, yes. So we got sent to London, and it was this incredible opportunity to have done the Middle East, but then to move on. And then on September 5th, 2001, we arrived in London. And I literally said to Julie, on the morning of September 11th, which is, remember, 5-hour difference, I said, this is going to be amazing. Covering Europe, wearing the blue blazer, riding Eurostar from London to Paris. This is going to be just fantastic. We all know what happened. It was about 1 o'clock London time when the world changed. And I knew I would be right back in that story. I'd be right back looking at the ground truth of how I'm going to get at that story. And sure enough, Boston Globe sent me, September 19th, I arrived in Afghanistan to stay on the story that I first started reporting as a police reporter in New York City, right? That's ground truth. That's what happens right in front of you. Stay with it. Don't give up. Keep going at it. The truth is hard work. When I got to Afghanistan, I spent several months reporting there. A lot of people, even my dearest friends and family, asked, how can you do this? You have 3 kids. How can you take that risk? And I think I did it because I felt like I had something to add. It was not to be a cowboy. It was because I had knowledge. I could help maybe a little bit our country understand what's going on. A little bit of enlightenment, a little bit of hard work to give you facts on the ground. And I think it's the public service of what we do. And when I hear the President of the United States literally say, journalists don't cover terrorism, they're too cowardly, I think he does not know the colleagues that I've worked with and I've had the great honor to work with, and the tremendous courage that goes into this profession at so many turns. Covered the war in Iraq, hard times. I was completely burned out. Had the journalistic version of PTSD. Boston Globe, an amazing employer, recognized that you can't keep doing this forever. And they said, would you like to do something that's called the Nieman Fellowship, which is a full year at Harvard paid. It's a year in your sweatpants to study, in my case, Irish poetry, life drawing. I took a wonderful music appreciation class with Julie called First Nights. It was the best year we've ever had as a family. It really restored so much. And it got me thinking about this craft I love. It got me thinking about journalism. And I really realized that it's broken. And it's not going to survive. This is the purpose of the Nieman Fellowship, to step back mid-career and evaluate. In the business school, they call it getting to the balcony. So you can see what's going on in your profession and then decide, what do you need to do? Where do you want to go with this? How are you going to change your life? Or how can you change from within? Or should you start something new? And you realize the genius of this fellowship is that they actually try to spark thinking like that. And in my case, it was, oh my God, the Boston Globe, this newspaper I love, it's not going to do foreign news anymore because it can't afford to. The changes of the internet were impacting the economics of newspapering, and I knew things are going to change dramatically. So I thought, what could I do to try to help there? And I had this idea. I'm going to create something called the GroundTruth Project. It's going to be a nonprofit. And we're going to bring together the best journalists that I can find, and we're going to go do great work, and I just got to get a Ford grant, and we're rocking. And that's not how nonprofits work, by the way. And I couldn't figure out how to do it. And I was in my basement with the pounding floorboards over my head. By the way, we had another son born in London named Jack, so we now had 4 boys pounding above me, and I'm thinking, there is no way I can pull off a nonprofit. And at that time, some of the advisors I had been talking with said, there's another idea here in town about this very similar, and it had investors behind it. And so we launched what was called Global Post. Global Post was an online, for-profit, international news organization. I'm incredibly proud of the entrepreneurial zeal that went into it. I'm really proud and will forever be proud of the editorial team and the award-winning work we produced, but it didn't succeed as a business. So I went back to the drawing board and I really thought about my original vision for what I wanted to do to try to create change from within our industry, to really get at it. And I loved this idea of ground truth for the same reason I started this by sharing with you the definition. I love that metaphor, and I came back to it. And then I had enough chops after 5 years trying to run a nonprofit newsroom and seeing a lot of successes and a lot of failures. I felt more confident, and I started the GroundTruth Project 5 years ago with an awesome team, many of whom are here tonight. And I'm not going to try to introduce them all, but please, when we're outside, I hope you have a chance to meet some of the team. Amazing, amazing team that I work with. But GroundTruth was a good idea. And just as I was making this transition, and I'm thinking, wow, I am truly bringing entrepreneurial spirit gained from a house painting business I had with my brothers and guys I grew up with, gained from being a bureau chief in Afghanistan where you really had to figure out how to get, for example, a generator, or how to buy a horse, and then how to feed the horse. Because you can't report in Afghanistan without a horse, because there were no roads when I arrived. And you had to get across the Kaukja River, and there were no bridges. This was the resourcefulness of foreign reporting that I thought I was bringing in, and I was feeling pretty confident that we could really do this. And it was exactly at that moment that we got terrible news. Just as we were making the transition, one of the reporters we had worked with at Global Post and at GroundTruth as we began to build it was Jim Foley. Now, Jim Foley's life is such an extraordinary example of someone who believes in getting at the ground truth. I have never truly met a young talent like him. Not only the courage and the conviction, there's a lot of that out there. The talent he had was extraordinary, but most of all that I remember about Jim was his spirit of public service. Jim had done 2 tours with Teach for America. He had taught prisoners inside of the county jails in Chicago to read. That was before he became a journalist. Jim's passion and his conviction was to bear witness. And I loved that about him. And he definitely was Jesuit trained. He didn't go here, he went to Marquette, but he really had the spirit of all these gentlemen. on this wall, these past presidents of BC, and he had a spirit of commitment to public service, and he wasn't afraid to talk about it. When Jim was captured, our hearts sank. This was a dear friend, and it really inspired me, I gotta say, to think that GroundTruth, we're gonna really do this now because we're gonna honor Jim through this. We're gonna teach safety training in journalism. We're gonna give journalists like Jim more funding, more support, and really advocate for their work. And that is absolutely what GroundTruth is all about and has been inspired to do. The training that we do is going to be critical, but I don't think it's going to be enough. And I don't think supporting a new generation of journalists alone is going to be enough. We're up against some real declines in the business. Now, I just want to share with you sort of what GroundTruth does, which is we do films, we do podcasts, we do digital, we do photography. We have a film that will premiere on September 24th. On World Channel called Crossing the Divide, and I'll come back to that. We just are really proud to have shared a big award at the Online News Association for our podcast and for our partnership with Frontline on a really wonderful immersive multimedia project called The Last Generation. But all this work and all the great partnerships we have and the reach we get through those editorial partners, it's definitely not going to be enough because trust in the media is plummeting. Every day it's eroding. Every day, those who weaponize doubt are doing a good job. There it is. That's the President of the United States talking about all that journalism, all that work, all that courage, and all that commitment that I see every day. He's calling it fake news, and he's calling us the enemy of the American people. Now, I am not partisan, but I got a problem with that. That's my tribe. Those are my people. And I feel like we need to defend that now. And we need to defend it because it is the cornerstone of our democracy. If we don't have a free press, if we don't have a press that can challenge that, we are in trouble. We went from defenders of democracy when I joined the profession, inspired by Woodward and Bernstein in 1976. Look at where we are now in 2016. The attacks on journalism are not only political, they're also really, really physical. We are seeing more journalists killed, intimidated, and jailed than any time in history. You all know what that is. That is the memorial for those journalists in Paris who were killed in the Charlie Hebdo attacks. It's not that far from home, people. This just happened in our country. 5 journalists shot dead in their newsroom. And we have to wake up to the fact that there's a connection between the attacks that are happening from the White House on the media and a culture that's trying to intimidate those who do this work. Every one of those 5 people was a great journalist, a fair, balanced journalist trying to do their job, and someone storms in their newsroom and shot them. Like, we better wake up. This is really happening, and this is really coming. Another thing that I've been made more aware of recently, and I'm embarrassed to say it took me so long, I should really be ashamed, but I was with the International Women's Media Foundation just recently in Texas for a big conference, and the statistics so alarmed me. They're statistics that feel like they're from the Swat Valley in Pakistan, the way women are treated who are journalists. 2/3, more than 2/3 of emerging women journalists have been directly harassed or threatened. 1 in 10 has been attacked. So I know, the journalist who was attacked in Tahrir Square was a friend, and I was there in Egypt when that attack happened. And I know these things happen, and it's always kind of been there, but I had no idea the depth of this problem, that it was really starting to come forward. This is the one that got me. As a result of those attacks, 1 in 3 emerging women journalists are considering leaving the profession. I'm really worried about that. 2/3 of the people applying for jobs with us are women, and therefore 2/3 of the people who get the fellowships we give out are women. I don't want that to slip. We're starting to make gains in the profession, and we're going to have to fight like hell to be sure we keep them inspired. So how many of you are women in here who are thinking about being journalists? Okay. Fight like hell, keep going, and call me. This crisis in journalism has become a crisis for our democracy, and there's no question about it. And we have to start to think about doing something, because local coverage has been decimated. News deserts are spreading. We've got 900 communities in America now who in the last 15 years lost their news organization. No one is watching the store. In little towns where the newspaper folded up, in county governments where the big state newspaper can't afford to cover that county anymore. We're seeing it everywhere, in every corner of America, and it's happening over and over again. And this one example from the Denver Post gives you a sense. The Denver Post staff in 2013, when they won the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the Aurora High School shooting. And now, that's who's there. It's evaporating right in front of us. The news deserts that are happening and forming and shaping all across the country are going to devastate our democracy if we're not careful. Local reporting is declining in unbelievable numbers. Look where I come in, late 80s, 1990, we're sort of at the height of it, 458,000 newspaper reporters, right at the height of when I'm doing all that work that I loved so much, and I think so fondly of that time in my life. We're down to 180,000 now. It's falling apart. The floor is falling out from under great news organizations in our country. Manipulation of news is growing. We all know this from fake news. We know this because we see it over and over again. I don't know if you're aware of this. One of the most trafficked stories in the 2016 election that was fake news was a very simple story that was completely fabricated. And it was that the Pope endorses Trump. And it was apparently read by 1/3 of Catholics in America who believed it. The Catholic vote was critical in electing Trump. Wake up. We got to wake up. We really have to wake up. I love this fact. When we were sort of starting in the field, it used to be almost 1-to-1. PR was a little bit of an edge on us, but we could always outmaneuver them. We could always navigate to the truth. By 2004, it was 3.2-to-1. By 2013, it's 4.6-to-1. And the number of PR people, the number of people who spread messages is growing, and the number of journalists is shrinking. So it's getting harder and harder to get to that truth. Why should you care? I hope I've convinced you enough just to connect it to the future of our democracy, but just in case you haven't gotten there yet. Fewer reporters means issues we need to know about are just not getting covered. It's very obvious, but it's real. Bad drinking water, inadequate health care, injustice in the courts, corruption at City Hall, failing schools, solutions that work don't get paid attention to. And I haven't mentioned any big partisan national issue that can divide us. These are local stories that we need to know about. So I'm really frustrated by all this, as you can tell, and I thought, what am I going to do? So in 2017, we decided we got to try something. We have to try to take a road trip through America to start to really see these places where the news organizations are drying up. How can we get out there and hear these voices? Because a lot of the reason we are where we are as a country is people don't feel heard. So I just took it upon myself to try to desperately raise some money, get a van, go forward, and put 5 reporters into this one beautiful van that we had wrapped with this insignia. And they wore t-shirts that said, "I'm listening." And we just sent them out into Kentucky and to Montana and into across the country, everywhere they could go, where they could try to find communities where they could do listening events and where they could report on the stories. So I'm going to play you, if we're okay on time, Jim, I'm going to play a 3.5-minute clip, and then we're going to close, and we'll go to questions. How do we think about this incredibly divided moment we're in as a country? This moment needs good journalism. We have to do the work that really matters. We have to be there on the ground. We have to be sure that when we're in a community, that community is being heard.
When you think about why people are angry, I think they've got reason to be. I think they feel cut off because they have been. They really have been forgotten.
They feel they're not really sometimes welcome. A lot of people stigmatize the whole community.
People want actual factual information. Don't try to make something a clickbaity title.
Well, I want them to be able to understand that just because where I came from doesn't change the fact that I have big dreams and that I want to be able to change the world just a little bit.
You guys, welcome. How you doing? We need to hear from corners of America that we haven't heard from. And I want you to go out with a mission to seek out voices that we're not hearing. And they might be even representing opinions that you profoundly disagree with. That's the divide. Have fun. Go all out and know we're here to support you.
Reading most publications said you'd think that everyone was fighting and at each other's throats. And what I found surprising was that so many people were welcoming and even keeled across the trip. Because what I encountered along the way was just a lot of people who want the same things. They want healthcare, they want their family to do well, they want to be happy, they want independence.
Once you get down there, once you find those commonalities and you start talking to folks on the ground, like, oh, we're more alike than we are different.
All of us cared a lot about the people we were meeting, about the issues we were covering, and about the people who were going to see our work. And I hope that we made some small step in rebuilding some of the trust that has been lost between the public and the media.
On the ground, people are a lot more decent and a lot more complex in their standards and viewpoints and value systems. And so it was an entire mosaic. I think the country is this blend of people, and that's what made this journey for me extremely beautiful.
I think we as journalists have a responsibility to report against what you already think you know or what you already know, just to see maybe you find something that you didn't.
I feel like our country has a lot of healing to do. And, we can't keep equating experiences, and we can't keep yelling over one another and be like, mine's worse. And when we just open up that conversation and start listening to each other and recognizing that it's different, I feel like our country will begin to heal.
So, this journey across America by these reporters, they are truly great talents. I really want you to watch this film. Find it online. It's going to be rebroadcast. You can check your local listings, as they say. We're also launching our podcast tomorrow, our new season. The new season of the podcast, called GroundTruth, premieres tomorrow, and it starts with Crossing the Divide. Wherever you get your podcasts, as they say, just search for GroundTruth. So if it's at Stitcher or iTunes, or wherever you go, just search for GroundTruth. You'll come into it. Please listen. The podcast won a very big award just over the weekend, and it's really gaining traction, but we need you to listen. The reason I think we need to do more on this local reporting is because in the absence of local reporting, we grow divided as a country. If we only listen to Fox and MSNBC, and we only care about issues like gun control and abortion, we're going to pull apart. We may never, ever get along. If we look at the bigger issues that directly impact our lives, like, for example, do you have clean drinking water? Has your city prepared for the impact of rising tides? I won't even say the climate change word, just it's a fact, tides are rising, they're wiping out roads, they're wiping out property. Is your community ready? Let's look at that story. Let's look at criminal justice. Let's look at big issues like loneliness, like despair, like anxiety, depression. Let's take a look at the stories that are right in front of us, that are locally based, that we can report on. Then we come together as a country. A neighbor of mine is here from our town, Harvard, Massachusetts. We had a huge debate about whether or not to build a big new school in our town. 1,000 people in a town of 5,000 people spent an entire day in a sweaty, echoing gym to hear all the points of view. No one knew if you were a Democrat or a Republican whether you voted for that school or not. It's more likely it had to do with how many kids do you have and what age are they. What do you think of property values in direct relation to good schools? That's the kind of journalism that pulls us together. And we need more of that if we're going to get back together as a country. So I think of local news as a binding agent for our country. Crossing the Divide, cool project, not a great idea, not scalable, and here's why. The reporters we sent out got exhausted, they got burned out, and they realized they're not spending enough time in the place where they are, right? We gave them 3 months in a van across the country. I thought, what, that's good, right? And they said, no, not enough time. So what we did is we went back to the drawing board and we really thought about what is going to be the solution to getting more local reporting into the field. And that solution for us is something we're calling Report for America. This is about bringing public service into journalism. This is Teach for America for journalism. We believe in the public service spirit of journalism. We are putting out a call to service for young journalists. Come and serve local communities by listening to the issues in those communities that aren't getting covered. Come and listen to people who feel they're not heard. Tell that story embedded in a local news organization. We'll cover 50% of your salary, and the host news organizations we select need to cover the other half. First 8 newsrooms, we had 85 news organizations apply. First 10 slots for the reporters, we had 1,000 applications. 100 of those young people were awesome, and I wanted to give them all a shot. But this is going to be about scaling, and it's going to be about funding. So if we're going to get this thing off the ground, it's going to require support. We think we can do it, but we're really going to need you to start following this. The biggest ask I'm going to make today is get on our newsletter. Go to the GroundTruthProject.org and just follow the work we're doing. Just engage with us as a community. We're trying to create a movement called Report for America. Thank you.
You spoke about needing support from the community to get this project off the ground. And do you have the kind of sustained giving that a lot of the radio programs have, the NPR, where people can give each month?
No. It's a great question, and we should have that. I happen to have Ann O'Brien, who's here, who's going to help me get that launched like next week. We don't, and we should. We absolutely should. It's like we're thinking every day about how to do this. We are small, we're tiny, but we really punch above our weight class in terms of the work we do, but we got to get better at how we do the fundraising and the development. We're based at WGBH, but we are independent. We raise all our own money. GBH, talk about best practices around fundraising and around how to do it. We're certainly surrounded by folks who know how to do this, and we love being based there, but we have a lot to learn from them. We have a lot of growth to do. Our biggest thing right now is to build a community. So when I think of community support, I think of following the work first. Come and see what we're doing. Meet some of the young reporters. Come to some of the events we're doing. And come in and be part of the community, and I'm hoping that'll follow on with more sophisticated approaches to development. Thanks.
Obviously, the GroundTruth Project is a nonprofit. Do you think the for-profit nature of most media outlets contributes to the crisis of confidence in truth in most media organizations?
That is a really good question. Did everyone hear the question? Wow. So the question on the table is, you know, we're a nonprofit. Does the for-profit model contribute to some of the failings we're seeing in journalism? Is that an accurate? Okay. The answer is yes. I think the for-profit model is collapsing. And I think it's collapsing because digital advertising is not paying the bills for great reporting. If you're wondering what the hell happened to those big, healthy newspapers, it's called the internet. The internet changed the business model. We no longer have the same relationship and revenue percentages that come from advertising, and it's really collapsed. It's also the failure, really candidly, and we got to be self-effacing. It was the failure of these great newspapers to see the future, right? There's a famous story from the Boston Globe in the mid-90s when a big classified ad aggregator came and said, we want to partner with you. You guys are the masters of classified ads. At that time, the Boston Globe put its hand out in the classified section and just received money. There used to be a room when we would walk into the newsroom, there was this whole place, a hub, where they had people in there taking classified ads, and they had like how many served today. It was like McDonald's of classified ads. And they thought it would never end, and they were arrogant. And they said to this guy, like, they sent him packing, like, hey, we got this, kid. We know how to do it. We don't need your fancy internet tool, right? That was called Monster. They ate the Globe's lunch. The Globe got arrogant, like a lot of businesses do, and we failed. I say we because I still think of myself as part of the Globe. I love the place. And I say this with a big heart and hope that they're going to figure it out. And they're doing a lot of good things. But that for-profit revenue model faded. And where it is now, if you connect advertising to clicks, you're going to start writing a lot about cats. When you start writing a lot about cats, you stop covering issues like healthcare or criminal justice or other big issues that we need to pay attention to. That's why I think the for-profit model is going to fade. What we're all about is a nonprofit model, but with revenue streams. We are not going to be able to succeed in this if we don't create revenue that will sustain us. So we're looking for the podcast. Can that have roll-on advertising? You know, mid-rolls are starting to become a real source of that. We're looking at our films. There's a real new market for documentary film. Our films win these huge awards. We're up against like unbelievable institutions like Frontline and 60 Minutes, and we win. And we have like 12 people on our team. You can play at the highest levels of the game right now, and it's a very low cost of entry. The question is, how are you going to get the revenue to sustain that without just going to the Ford Foundation and other foundations or individuals who support you? And that's the challenge in front of nonprofits. And that's the challenge for us. And it's really going to require a lot of creative thinking, and it's going to require working like hell to get revenue, not because it's going to go to profit, but because it's going to go to sustain the operation, allow us to grow, and allow us to reach scale. We're trying to put 1,000 reporters out into local communities with Report for America within 5 years. That is a lofty, ambitious goal. I should really be sitting down while I say that, because it literally makes me dizzy. Right now we have 13 newsrooms. We just worked really hard to get 28 funded for next year, 2019. Our goal for 2020 is 250 newsrooms. Every individual reporter is $40,000. We don't set the starting salary, the local newspaper does, but on average they're about 36 to 40, including benefits. And we won't work with a news organization that doesn't give a young reporter benefits, healthcare. That means we raise 20, the newspaper has to raise 10, and then we ask them to work with their community to raise 10. Community has buy-in, news organization has buy-in, and we're going to match it. That's a formula that can work. We have to bring that to all our work with documentaries, with podcasts, and with everything we do. And we are working extremely hard on that. I'm looking for Anna. Anna, we have a wonderful new finance director who's really helping us think this through. Our team is thinking it through every day. It's the question, sorry, I forget your name. I met you earlier, but Stephen? Stephen, it's the question of the day. Great question.
Hi. I don't expect you to necessarily have a perfect answer to this, but more just to hear your thoughts. In talking about GroundTruth and in terms of the White House, when your one source of this GroundTruth, namely Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is so openly combative to the press, and when directly confronting the president results in losing your privileges, how do you get at that GroundTruth?
Another great question. I'm going to quote my former boss, Marty Barron, who was asked, "Don't you feel you're at war with the White House?" And his answer, very Marty Barron. Simple, short, not emotional, but awesome. We're not at war, we're at work. That's the answer. Get to work. Just keep doing your job, to quote Bill Belichick. That's what we got to do.
Talk about revenues and raising money, ad dollars, that are disappearing. Yet, when I read my various sources of news, I constantly see people buying publications. And so I don't know a lot about it.
Right.
But a question of ownership of news media raises, and I can't recall the specifics or the name, but there's a entity that is worrisome about buying scores and scores of local newspapers, which
Sinclair Media.
Where you say it, exactly. I wasn't going to say it. So I just want to know your thoughts about any perhaps threat or controlling worries you might have about from the ownership standpoint?
Another really good question. One of the things not to forget is, okay, there are these forces, inextricable market forces bearing down on journalism, and they include the disruption of the traditional ad model, classified, or just print advertising. Remember Jordan Marsh? Like, they were awesome. They supported the Boston Globe because they advertised in the Globe, right? Remember Ernie Bach? Come on down. Thank you, Ernie Bach. That was real ad dollars that came into newspapers. Those are real forces. Another force that's at work is a different kind of market, which is venture capitalists who have snapped up newspapers for the real estate, and they're buying them all over the country, and they really don't give a damn about the public service mission or about the communities they're in. What they care about is they can get revenue out of it. Maybe it's only single digits, but if they lay off half the staff, they can up that to 20% of revenue, of profit margins. They can then let the newspaper burn out, get wiped out, and they don't care. They move on. They sell the real estate. They trashed it at 20%. So there's a lot of that going on in newspapers. When you read about consolidation of newspapers and you hear about a firm like Trunk, I mean, my God, it's like, what better B-villain name could you create than a conglomerate named Trunk that will go around gobbling up newspapers? When they do that, pay attention to the actual economics of that. Raw capitalism, unfettered, is not about public service. It's about individual wealth. It's about a lot of good things in our country. It's about prosperity, but it will kill public service. It eats public service for lunch and suckers who believe in it like me. That's a big part of the landscape of what's happening. On that landscape, one of the most controversial conglomerates is Sinclair News. I think these guys are motivated ideologically as well. They're very far right, and they are making a concerted play to go and buy particularly local television stations. When they buy a local television station, they put forward what is to be said on the air. And I don't know if you've seen it. Check this out online. You can search for it. There's one where they took like 20 stations around the country, and they had them, all the news readers are reading a story as if it's their own thing, and they're even acting casual about it. And it's an absolute script with a lot of very, I would say, extreme far-right points of view, hitting notes, hitting things that are really clearly outside of the mainstream, you know, and it's, okay, hey, who was it who said the right to an editorial page is reserved for those who can afford to buy a newspaper? Right? So the Boston Globe, the family, the Taylor family, had certain points of view that would be considered left of center, sometimes further. That's one thing to put that on your opinion page. This idea, like even young people today don't understand, the opinion page is where opinion is. And then the other pages are where news is. And we used to have this thing called a firewall between them. Now I feel like I have to wear Kevlar, like a heat shield suit every day. It's not a wall won't do it, because the fires are all around us. And Sinclair, when you listen very carefully, the messaging that's there is horrifying. It's like out of a bad science fiction movie with a lot of people with really nice haircuts in markets all over the country saying the exact same thing for an owner who's told them what to say from a very far right-wing ideological point of view. So when they talk about the liberal bias in the media, wake up. Fox News has 10 times the audience of MSNBC. There's not a liberal bias in the media any more than there is a far right bias in the media. The point is there's bias in the media. We've got two extremes, MSNBC and Fox. I don't think of them as journalists. I just don't. Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity. Neither one of them is doing the real hard work like the people I've shared with you here have done. So market forces really matter, capitalism really matters, and pay attention to what's happening around us, because I really truly think, and I say this in a way that journalists, we get really queasy around anyone who starts using patriotism. Jefferson, or was it de Tocqueville? One of those guys said, patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels, okay? But I feel really patriotic, so maybe I'm a scoundrel. I feel like journalism is at the heart and soul of who we are as a country, a free press, a sense that we're gonna have someone who can challenge authority and do it the right way. It's the cornerstone of our democracy. And if the forces of capitalism start hurting that cornerstone of democracy, we need to check them too.
What do you think are the ethical issues or pressures that journalists are feeling now that news has to react so quickly, especially with citizens reporting news that aren't journalists, and then the journalists have to catch up without necessarily checking their facts?
What a great question, and thanks for coming. That is such a good question, because there was a time in my life when I spent an entire day, 24 hours, and sometimes an entire week working on my lead. I would agonize, and I'd think, well, does that get at it? No, I got to change this and do that. And then I got a couple quotes, and the craft of journalism was done in longer increments of time. And I'm really concerned about the pressures right now to write fast. We make mistakes when we do that. I don't know what the answer is, because the news cycles are not going to change. But I think you as consumers of news can seek out those who take it a little bit more slowly, and who actually think about depth, and who think about immersive content. I feel like I'm a pitch-o-matic up here for our content, but I love it. Like, I love the people who work on it. It's awesome. Go watch The Last Generation, the story of 3 children in the Marshall Islands who are watching king tides are going to swamp their island. They are part of an organized retreat that's going to happen all over the world, particularly in small islands in the Pacific. They know they're not going to have kids there. They need to leave within 15 years. Their cemetery is already washed over by the ocean. Their ancestors have floated out to ocean. Their articulation of the fear they have of climate change through the eyes of children took us a year. It's 1/2 hour. It's totally immersive. It has really accurate data. It has such attention to detail that it's heartbreaking to see this team of emerging journalists who worked on it, and our own team of producers who worked on it. What they brought to that is extraordinary. But we were lucky to work with PBS Frontline on it, so we have pretty good audience. But like, if all of you watched this thing, you'd probably help us move the needle on our numbers. It's like that small. Like, it's literally going to come down to physically connecting with human beings and getting them to understand the content you're doing and the quality that's there. It's like bespoke journalism. It's like going into a really great craft shop and seeing something. How many of you have ever been to the Alden shoe shop, where they make shoes? They last like 30 years. I don't know how these guys stay in business, but like, we're Alden shoes. And we need you to go out and look at the work. So I'd say, I don't know the answer, but I would say you can vote every day by going where you're seeing that kind of work. Frontline, our partner, is amazing. Amazing work, amazing attention to the work. The New York Times, right now, yeah, they're trying to stay up on the news cycles, and when they do, they sometimes make mistakes. And I may be a little bit biased, but every day that newspaper is a daily wonder. The Boston Globe's Spotlight team, the Hollywood thing did a lot for them, but they've been doing that for decades. Really good, hard-hitting investigative work. The Globe's sports page still has great thought and consideration, and they clearly are on the right side every time. I would say, vote with your fingers. Go where you see the work you want, and then think, even though you are probably in college, and this would be hard to do, it might take you to get your first job to do it, pay for a subscription to that service, or give to National Public Radio, or give to Frontline. That's what it's going to take. You're consumers, you vote all the time. If you believe in it, support it.
I was wondering what advice you have for students and recent graduates looking to get into the field, especially in a sustainable way, when it feels like every opportunity right now is an unpaid internship. Like, at what point does getting field experience and putting your work out there no longer outweigh unpaid labor?
Our head of HR is here, and I'm going to tell you right now, she's an alum of this prestigious institution. Her name is Ann O'Brien, and we pay for internships, or you get credit. It's one or the other. And anyone who's offering you an unpaid internship, you shouldn't take it. You should get paid for your work, or you should get credit for your work. Unless it's an extraordinary opportunity and there's real mentoring that you're not going to get anywhere else, and you're willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and throw in for a while, okay, I could understand that. But really, we're obligated to try to make those opportunities for people. I love this question as the last question, because my answer to you would be, do not despair. It's always been hard to be a journalist. In the 1930s, they made about the same amount they make now. In the 40s and 50s, the quote, heydays of journalism, people were paid very little. Newspapers had single-digit profit margins. It's only in the 80s and 90s, when they got to double-digit profit margins, that journalism started to become professionalized, and journalists were able to make more money. And I am in that cohort, right? I had a good living. I had an opportunity to live abroad. I have 4 kids. I'm really lucky. I get it. But it was never easy. When I worked in that little tiny radio station in Western New England, it wasn't easy. It was hard. So don't think you're alone, don't despair, and just never give up, because there's great opportunities. I am not one of those people, and I really hope I didn't sound this way. I don't think the best days of journalism were in the past. The best days of journalism are in the future. We live in a revolutionary moment of storytelling. What's happening right now with your ability as a young journalist to learn how to tell stories in new ways is so extraordinary, you'd have to go back to Gutenberg to find a similar time. So get into it, make it happen, be resourceful, take a couple business classes, because we're going to need not only great journalists, we're going to need entrepreneurs who bring the energy and the passion and the interest and the love for the craft into thinking about the future and about those revenue streams. And most of all, get on our newsletter and apply for Report for America. That's where you should start. Thank you.